Thank you for tuning in to Stay Sharp with Razorleaf, your secret weapon for all things digital in products and manufacturing. In today's episode, the podcast team is joined by Jennifer Herron, CEO of Action Engineering, a consulting firm specializing in 3D data transformation. Jennifer jumps right into this conversation to emphasize the importance of a mindset shift that needs to happen in organizations when adopting model-based approaches. Jennifer, Jonathan, and Jen explore the importance of measuring business value beyond efficiency and the challenges of moving model-based engineering, MBE, and model-based definition, MBD, beyond the engineering department. Let's tune in and gain some pearls of wisdom in this conversation.
Welcome back, everybody, to Stay Sharp, the podcast about all things digital related to products and manufacturing. I am Jen Ferello, and I am joined by my co-host, Jonathan Scott.
Hi, everybody.
And today we are going to dig into models, model-based definition, model-based engineering, enterprises, etc. There's a lot of buzzwords around this, and for assistance in discussing the topic, we have one of the world's experts on MBD, Jennifer Herron. Jennifer, you want to tell us a little bit, or our listeners a little bit about yourself and your experience in this space?
Sure. Thanks, Jen. Thanks, Jonathan, for having me on. I always like chatting about model-based definition.
Yeah.
Obsessively, probably. So my experience with model-based definition is started back in my early career when I did spacecraft and robotic research and development design work. And I used CAD systems, lots of different CAD systems. I'm actually old enough to have used ideas from what ultimately was Siemens and now is NX. So dating myself. So all that different experiences with all those different CAD systems kind of led me to there's got to be a way to kind of pull all this detail up to a CAD agnostic level or a software tool agnostic level and start looking at what the processes would be if it wasn't just about the software tool. So that being said, that led me to create Action Engineering and write a book about how to reuse your CAD. And then that book kind of evolved into where we are with model-based definition today, which is using the annotated CAD models, and I'll say throughout the enterprise as much as possible. And that is evolving and changing every month at a minimum. And then every organization that's implementing it today is using it in new and creative ways, which is super fun and cool and extremely chaotic and disruptive. So what we do at Action Engineering is help guide through that chaos and disruption and hopefully try to bring some baseline experience of, I know you want to do it that way, but let's do it a different way because that'll take you down a rabbit hole that you'll never get out of. So that's what we're doing is consulting and training specifically for 3D data.
Great. And as a matter of fact, I think you're the first author we have had on the podcast. So.
At least that we know of.
Great. That's true. I mean, we've had a musical performer, but we haven't had an author yet.
Oh, that's cool. That's way cooler than me. I wish I could be a musician, preferably a rock star. Yeah. So.
You are a rock star. Just in a different context.
But like not on stage. Like it would be more fun. That would be more fun.
I've seen you on stage. It's fine.
That's my secret life. And my the left side of my brain is the creative theater side that I've always done. So
nice.
All right, Jonathan, I think you had kind of a concept as far as what we wanted to talk about beyond just the basics of MBD.
Right. So that's, the sort of genesis of wanting to have Jennifer on and talk about this is, like you mentioned in her introduction, just one of the world's experts on this topic. But I think the topic of model-based enterprise that a lot of our listeners want to hear about, want to understand and know more about, is about how MBD in this area that, is still evolving, obviously, but how it impacts the rest of the organization. Because so many people, when you say model-based enterprise, their mind immediately goes to 3D model, right? Okay, good. That's great. That's a good start, right? And model-based definition, what that is, I don't want to necessarily dig into that today, although maybe we need to do that in the future and come back to that topic, right? But I wanted to just get that broad view because you see it all the time, Jennifer, right? You see companies who are after some kind of MBD goal, but because they're trying to get to something else. So what are the other models in the enterprise? What are the models they're trying to connect to derive from, all that? So I'm hoping we can kind of just roam around this a little bit, right? Like what's around MBD? What are people trying to get out of it? What does that mean to this enterprise using models, right? So that's what I'm hoping we can dive into.
Okay, cool. And this is super fun. So one of the things I thought you were going to say was, when people think about model-based enterprise, they think about a Cameo model and model-based systems engineering and SysML. So there's
that is also true.
There's the perspective that you're coming from in your organization. If you're a systems engineer, you see it from the requirements route. If you're a design engineer and CAD jockey like me, you see it from the, this is manufacturing data. I'm telling the manufacturer how to do this, and then I need to make sure my requirements are clear for quality and inspection activities. Everybody's perspective is different. Layer in procurement and IT and shop floor management. They all have their own perspectives from their own experiences, their own software tool use, their own processes that they've been doing in their career, never mind the different companies and industries. So, show up with 100 people in the room and say, what is model-based enterprise? You're going to get 100 definitions. So that there in and of itself is the biggest challenge. So I think what's important is a mindset shift. It's not about software tools. It's not about processes. It's always about people, because I don't care what anybody says. People are actually doing this work. And
right. Well, none of this works without the people. As much as we might say that, part of the idea is like, well, models talking to other models and models talking to machines. As much as we talk about maybe taking people out of some steps, it's still all about people.
Still all about people. And we have to keep the goal of, okay, well, is this something useful to the user?
Right.
And useful to the user, I mean, there's lots of creative ways to solve useful to the user. So mindset shift is really important. And I like this topic because we can move away from this is just an engineering challenge and broaden it up to the whole enterprise. Because one of the things we like to do is get a whole bunch of people from the entire enterprise, a cross-functional team in the room. And a cross-functional team doesn't mean 5 different engineers in engineering.
Some places it does, but it shouldn't, is your point.
Shouldn't. Yeah. I mean, yes, we do want the manufacturing engineers and the quality engineers, and a lot of the process improvement people in the room. Like we definitely want those people in the room, but
it's beyond just design, is what you're saying. And I think that's not terribly uncommon. A lot of times when we're talking about different systems, different platforms, a lot of things start in engineering. But the whole point of the digital thread is to move beyond engineering, both before and after engineering and design.
Yeah. And I think that where people get hung up in the engineering is they really get stuck on current roles. So they're like, okay, engineer makes drawing, passes to quality department, they balloon drawing, and we don't ever talk to each other. There's a big conversation when we introduce digital metrology automation opportunities. Well, who's doing the ballooning? Is it the engineering department? Because we don't know how to do that. Or is it the quality department? And now they have to handle a CAD file because they don't know how to do that. I'm like, so what? Like it's, that's okay, you're putting constraints in place for your existing processes that may or may not be relevant in the future, or to get out of a return on investment of a model-based activity that you want to do. So
this is one of the hardest.
Yeah.
This is one of the hardest parts of organizational change, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there are lots of hard parts of organizational change, don't get me wrong, but that being trapped in that mindset of, well, how are we ever going to do that? Because this is what we have today. This is what people know how to do today. Oh, well, here's a great idea. We do training, right? We can show people how to do new jobs, and we are dealing with lots of knowledge workers and intelligent people and people with skills who can learn new skills. But it's tough because you're stuck in that thought process.
Well, and this is an evolution for us as action engineering. About 5-6 years ago, we had really robust training classes, and we were teaching people how to author model-based definition and in a whole bunch of different CAD packages. And then we were translating them to derivatives and publishing 3D PDFs and all sorts of, activities that everybody is trying and doing. But then it completely got blocked by like one person. And a person that I think, if you look at this from a very strategic level, people would not think were important, like the receiving inspection person. They wouldn't have even thought, oh, that receiving inspection inspector is extremely important, because I have just completely changed their requirements from this piece of paper and the ruler they used to use to now a digital model that they're looking at on a screen. And I didn't bother to give them any digital metrology tools to do the receiving inspection. So those are the kinds of gotchas that are really important. You gotta kind of throw off all the shackles of your existing business processes, which is extremely difficult. I mean, it definitely doesn't help your P&L bottom line. So that's hard.
And to your point earlier, it's, the subject we're talking about today is not all about technology, right? And it's not all about process. And it is very people-centric, but I would maybe make the counter argument that actually it's about all of them. You have to look at all of them together and sort of remove the constraints from all of them to get where you want to be, right? To your point about, you didn't give the person the right tool to perform their process and maybe didn't think about where they fit in the process. And then the person ends up being the blocker for what you're trying to change because of that. So you got to look at all of it, right?
Right. And that ties into the psychology of people, which is why we started infusing organizational psychology and understanding people at a better level. We try to practice it within action engineering also, just, okay, here are my triggers, and here's how I know I'm triggered. Let's not be a reptile and go into my reptilian brain. Let's evolve beyond that. So I think that all contributes to the mindset. And sometimes for us engineers, evolving beyond the, I call it the, Sheldon Cooper user interface. It's a little hard.
Engineers as reptiles, I got it. I mean, you're not wrong, right? And we can all say that because engineering background. So
yeah. I want to come back and dig in, right? So you mentioned a topic, and it's the one that's always sort of like right at the front of my brain on this area we're discussing today, right? And that is this idea of going from design to inspection, right? Or design to quality, and ballooning drawings, right? And this idea of, we used to balloon a drawing, and then we'd have critical characteristics checklist, and we'd come down and we'd do our measurements based on that. And there was an interface, and there were clear roles, and we used the drawing, or maybe in a lot of organizations, multiple copies of a drawing. Oh, well, there's the release drawing, there's the inspection drawing.
Copy. Yeah.
Copy, right? Yeah. And interface and wall and interface and translate and all this stuff. Yeah. And I just want to tie it back to my view on model-based enterprise, and then dig into, all right, so what do we think a good future state should be? So for me, model-based enterprise is about a group of people in an organization who are sharing models, right? Who are trying not to do the copy thing, right? I'm
sharing
I've got
source
a dimension.
Models, I think. Like they're sharing the responsibility to keep that source model up to date.
Right. Or collection of models, and that's one of the things I want to dig into, right? But yes, they're sharing an authoritative source and trying to sort of improve and enhance and grow that definition of whatever it is they're doing, the product, the process, et cetera, rather than, I created my own. Oh, now it's off and it's disconnected and it's, unrelated and that kind of thing. So for me, model-based enterprise is using models to do that kind of sharing rather than that kind of interfacing and translating and handoff across the silo wall, that sort of thing.
Right.
So I want to dig into this one because I think it's a great example. Lots of people will understand. So we know what the sort of existing state, legacy state can be, regardless of how you do your CAD, you end up with a drawing. The drawing gets handed over to someone who's going to inspect, and they're going to make a plan based on that drawing of what they're going to inspect, how they're going to do their job. And so we get the two separate things, two separate jobs and two separate artifacts and all these things. So let's dig into the model world. What does that look like? What could that look like? What should that look like?
So when you say what should that look like, is it what does the source data look like?
Well, what is the
flow
the
of
entire
information?
process, I think.
The entire process.
Yeah, what does the
Gotcha.
process look like? Right.
Yeah.
And dig into as many fun technical things as you want here, right? Because I know we could get into QIF. We could talk about all kinds of stuff here. But yeah, what from your perspective, Nirvana is?
Okay. Nirvana is, I like that. Nirvana is, which we may never achieve, but getting on the journey to get there is important and will bring you value.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I think Nirvana is thinking about the data we use as source and derivative data. And you may add the authoritative tag at anywhere along the way.
Mm-hmm.
Source data, we typically think of that as native CAD data. And derivative data typically gets used in manufacturing to build in-process models, to build manufacturing instruction sets. I can make a derivative of an assembly that is a manufacturing instruction, and it is authoritative for the technician that puts that data together. It is authoritative for their job.
I was just going to ask, what makes it derivative? Is it that it's
a copy?
It connects to something else?
It's a copy.
It's a copy. Oh, okay. All right.
But don't we want to go a little bit beyond copy, move a little bit further down the value chain than copy, in that it's, to me, copy is a static thing. So manufacturing work instruction, once generated, they're just done. But like now, there's at least the ability to automatically update if the CAD model changes. How does that automatically flow downstream? Yeah, so great point. I think if we do a mindset shift, moving away from here's a document that I copy, right? Or evolve, which happens, is instead I'm thinking of the data elements in my source authoring system, whatever that is. Those data elements are different pieces of information. And we typically break it down, and we've got geometry or the shape information. We have annotations, we have attributes, we have presentation states for human readability. And then when we get to assemblies, we typically think of the CAD BOM or the product structure that then flows out, because that's critically important. Mm-hmm. So if we think about those data elements, Jen, I think that for us, what happens in sort of our more advanced model-based definition best practices is that we focus on the data element. Okay, what is changing in the geometry and where does that flow to in all my enterprise processes? Because the geometry oftentimes hits up to the dynamic and static analysis operations or a CFD event or something like that. They don't really care about the presentation states. In fact, I've never run across an analyst who does. Because all they're going to do is strip out all the radiuses and chamfers and make a finite element model, which is a great upstream use case that we haven't really figured out how to integrate cleanly with model-based definition. We're really relying on individuals to do that transformation. Lots of technical technology and opportunity within that kind of a loop. So that's one little rabbit hole. But if
I'm going to take before we move past that rabbit hole, I'm just going to point out, this is why this topic is so interesting. As I said, models beyond engineering, right? Or beyond MBD. Well, you just named one. There's a use case, simulation analysis, right?
Yep.
All right, keep going. Sorry.
And it's good. I'm glad you said that, because the other upstream, very obvious one that I've had probably 9 conversations about in the last 9 weeks is how do I connect my SysML models to my model-based definition? I'm like, I don't know, but you should try someday. But
we love to talk about that, right?
Yeah.
All right, MBSE and PLM, parameters extracted,
totally
moved over to CAD, but it's a great question.
One of the very first training activities I did 10 years ago, I had a systems engineer manager in the room, and they're like, great, I have all my requirements, they're indoors, and I'm totally going to connect this on down to the manufacturing work. And I was like, well, yeah, it's a great idea.
In theory.
And you in what army?
Yeah, you in what army? Yeah, I mean, I think that's the challenge, is that we haven't even defined well enough the requirements breakdown and manufacturing for model-based definition, to feed into those downstream activities, which is just a big scope and is, lots of people are doing it in pilots and practice. They're practicing like in their garage kind of thing, but they're not, to get this produced and out into a production level, giant scaled environment is still extremely challenging. And there are all these little tiny threads that people are threading through for sure, which is great. I mean, they have to, right? They're gonna build these little tiny threads of digital connectivity and traceability with the feedback loops, and eventually we'll build a bigger, blanket of digital connectivity and transformation. Or traceability.
That one you just brought up, I wanna come back to how I got on a topic already. But that source derivative piece, right? The example you just mentioned, because you started down if the CAD model and the annotations of dimensions and geometry, those are source for the process planning that happens down, or the inspection plan that happens downstream. Then source and derivative, and I was digging into that a little bit. So I want to dig into it from the other angle. When you mentioned MBSE, let's say Magic Server Pixie Dust makes it so that we can get the parameter from the MBSE model for the dimension of some component into the CAD model. Now, at that point, does that mean that parameter, that data element in the CAD model is now derivative from the MBSE source?
Exactly. That's, I think, what makes everybody's head explode. And then they're like, screw it. I just need everything in one model and put everything in the NX model. And I'm like, okay. So you can't. And then that drives what I call like this crazy software tool churn. Everybody is like, all I can think about is everything has to go in one place. So I want, please CAD tool A, B, and C, please give me everything in here. And then, the CAD tool, they have a business to run. So they have to...
And a primary function, right?
And a primary function
is to design.
That's right.
Well, and despite what each of the maybe major software vendors in the CAD and PLM space would like to think, it may not be best to run your entire enterprise through their tool, particularly not their CAD tool. No, perhaps it wouldn't be best.
And are they going to tell you that? Yes, that's their job. So that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. I think it's up to the organization that's implementing to be, I was going to say careful, but then I don't want you to be like engineering careful, where you try to get to 100% solution and never get anywhere. So you get somewhere.
You have to know your business. You have to know basically the process flow of data.
Yeah.
What data?
Get some perspective careful, right?
And you've got to, I think, Jen, I'm glad you brought up business, because this has come up also in conversation recently, is that the business side is trying to lump business decisions onto engineers and IT groups that may or may not have the bigger business perspective. So again, you've got to have a cross-functional team where you are batting around the very nitty-gritty details, because there's an impact to business value and vice versa. And so the connectivity of the business decisions with technology decisions is actually extremely critical. And if you've got business folks that ignore the technology and technology folks that ignore the business, then forget it. You're in churn. You'll never get anywhere.
Right. Yeah, because it's then going to become it's a cool tool problem.
It's a cool tool problem.
No, isn't this a neat process we're going to but to your point, if it's not all connected to value to the enterprise, right, and not even that it's necessarily a business, right, because we've got some government entity customers that it's value to them, whatever value is. If it's speed to fleet, great. If it's more projects, research projects out the door, great. But whatever it is, whatever that value is, if you don't connect it. Yeah,
well, and
you're not going to get
there's
there.
value, and I'm not entirely sure. I have 2 engineering degrees. I'm not an MBA, but I think there aren't enough metrics around valuing people's user experience with the tools, because it actually is a huge impact on their performance.
Yep.
If the tools are better, if I can search something better to find the data faster, I mean, that's one of the typical, model-based statistics is, engineers spend 75% of their time searching for data. Here's a better way to search for the data. Well, it's all predicated on the data being accurate to begin with. So that's a gotcha moment. But that's an important step, is that user experience. And last I heard, literally this morning, they're still like slicing and dicing the brain to even understand how it works. So I don't think we've not hit the magic button of user experience. Ideal
to your point, we don't measure that enough when we look at business value, right? And I'll say, when I see it get measured, it's usually because somebody's got an emergency, right? The industries that we'll talk with, where it's like, our workforce is aging and retiring, and we can't get young people to work here because they don't want to work with our tools, right? You run into somebody who's having that problem, they're measuring it. Everybody else, may not be there yet. But once you have an emergency, you realize that, wait, that is something I have to pay attention to. And it's not just about efficiency. It can be, but it's also just, can I hire people?
All right. So I'm going to stop you guys right here, because we're definitely going tangential here. Okay.
No, I don't do that. That doesn't ever happen. I don't know what you're talking about.
So we want to get a little bit more back to the specifics of, what needs, if models are going to move beyond engineering,
what's important,
to use a phrase that we learned yesterday, Jonathan, what needs to be true?
Right.
What needs to be true? So how do we move beyond, how do we move MBE or MBD out of engineering and beyond? What are the...
Well, I want to focus that a little bit, because I want to come back to the thing I was asking about earlier and use that maybe as an example. So back to that, inspection idea, from engineering to quality. What does that nirvana look like?
Okay, so it has really robust source data in the CAD, and we have not found any pragmatic way to not have it that way. So it's robust source data in the CAD models at whatever level your CAD tool is allowing you to do. You will have to make choices about what doesn't work. But hopefully you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. There's 80% solutions in there, and then you've got to make choices about, great, these are rock solid digital traceability connectivity points between design and inspection, so we're going to use that and go forward with it. So I think it looks like that. I think any derivative translations or publications, or connecting it within a larger data exchange tool like a PLM or like a supplier portal data exchange system, those processes, those workflows, those algorithms have to be robust and trusted. Because the second a supplier picks up a data set and they deliver an end item, like, here's a show and tell, since we have video. Here's our end item. They're going to send you this part, but you made a change about where you want the logo. There's my logo. So you made a change. I don't want the logo here. I want the logo here. And the supplier never got it. Now you reject their part.
Right.
They're never going to trust your digital data again. They're going to say, that didn't work. Go back to the 2D drawing you used to give me. That was better. And that's sort of the default answer. So there has to be a bigger conversation. There has to be a different way of contracting with a supplier in this instance, to have a broader conversation about the way you've changed the data. So,
So you touched on so many good processes with just that example, right? And I will admit, I'm still back here on like the simplest piece of the everything goes right, sunshiny day scenario. But to your point, change. Right? Downstream exchange of the data across organizational boundaries. Like, there's lots of things that you just added in there that are really important to figuring this out. I'm going to keep bringing us back to my little tiny case, though. So, because I struggle with this one, I want to create I'll say derivative data, but I'm going to argue that point in a minute. But I want to put that inspection balloon on a dimension in that authoritative CAD model and say, that's the thing I need to inspect, and here's how I'm going to inspect it, and here's the tool I need to use to inspect it. And, I'm going to put all these other details in. And so my first question is going to be, now, is that source data for the quality person? So it's derivative, but help me on that one a little bit. Like, can you dig into that a bit?
I think we're overthinking it a little bit.
Okay.
I mean,
that's fair.
I think that, yes, that's important, but it is certainly a hot conversation. I don't really care who does the source data. But that being said, I don't have inspectors who've been doing inspection for 30 years or, drafters who've been drafting for 30 years with a very straightforward way of the way they do work. That's the hard part, right? Is moving away from that mindset. So again, we keep coming back to the people, but people are important.
But somebody's going to do something, right? To your point. And if you don't worry too much about what's in the box, somebody's going to do something, and then that's going to define an inspection plan, right? And so this is the part where I think it's interesting and what I'm sort of driving at and wanting to pick apart and just talk through.
Here's my example of this. So my son, he's 19, he'll be 20 in August. And when he was about maybe 10 or 11, they got Google Docs, right? Google Docs, the first thing they released is go in there and start editing somebody else's work. And I saw him do that. I'm like, oh my God, what are you doing?
That's amazing.
That's amazing.
Scary.
That's scary. I'm an engineer with controlled processes in my head. I'm like, where's the revision control?
I think you're exactly right. Engineers in control.
Totally different mindset. So what if somebody comes into my model and adjusts it? I'm pissed. I am pissed off. You touched my data. That's my job. Like, I mean, so I think it's again, mindset shift that we are not taking advantage of. This is the great thing about hiring Gen Z now. They grew up with Google Docs. They don't care. They do not give a shit.
Right.
Like, great. Oh yeah, update it. We're cool. We're working in a team. It's cool. Or if they really don't like it, they're going to go change it back.
You're hitting on the key detail here, right? And I love that we're getting into this. This is exactly what I wanted to talk about, right? So we're using engineering to quality as the example, but this applies to the whole enterprise. That's right. What we're talking about, right? Which is how are we going to share together yet stay sane?
Well,
right? And that's the topic. And different people have different ways of doing it. With Google Docs, you've got a generation that has a mindset that says, I trust digital, right? I trust the configuration management tool on the back end, Google Docs, is going to have my old version and the new one that you added, that I added. At any point, I can go back to the old one. We can figure it out, right?
But I also trust you, Jonathan. You're a manufacturing engineer, and you know better what the tolerance is or the way to build the part. And you go in and you're like, you know what, this tolerance is kind of, you've made it really tight. Do you really need it this tight? And I don't know. Let me think about it from a design, And so you're having better conversations on the source data, ideally. Now, the source to derivative conversation is a whole nother internal, external, blah, 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 blah. But, and they're just because...
Right. It's all your perspective, right?
Yeah,
Which way are you looking at it from?
The way we've sort of simplified it for our brains so that we can advise people is, look, if you're inside your organization, you have complete control of all of your tool sets, then keep it as source data as much as possible. Until you don't, they're purchasing people that don't want to open a CAD model. Then you need to layer in some better user experiences that improve or give that procurement person the information they want. I can think of 100 examples of how that can be done. But and so that's important. And then when you got to go external and you can't control the software tool sets that are being used on that's when you got to hit this interoperability layer of, I've got to move from native CAD platform ecosystem to something. Then we hit standards, and that's definitely a part 2. conversation.
Right.
I didn't even mention standards until like,
animal.
what are we, like 30 minutes in? Yeah, but standards are also a thing.
Yeah,
It's
and
super
important, right? To your point about moving outside of boundaries that you can control, you have to think about interfaces. And when you do, interfaces and standards go hand in hand. So yeah, it's an important topic, and one we should come back to. I agree. I want to come back to my simple example again and point out something that this is the piece where I really start to care, because I am, the CM and PLM geek. I love this stuff.
We're going for hours, I can tell.
Yeah.
No, go ahead.
But we've got, in theory, one file or two files, right? I'll keep it simple for a minute. You've got, or two. No, simple, Jennifer, simple.
I'm just being real.
Yeah, it's true. But you've got your model, your CAD model. It's got the dimension in it and the tolerance that you're going to inspect. You've got this other file, whatever it is, QIF. It's something proprietary. Okay, it's something that defines, hey, that dimension, this is what I want to measure, how I want to measure it, blah, blah, blah. How many times I want to inspect it, whatever it is. Okay. You could have copied that dimension value over to that file. No, I don't like that, right? You could have linked the two, but now those two files need to find each other. Or you could have said all that inspection information needs to go back in the one file. There is no second file. It all has to go in the main one. And this topic, I think, is really important to this whole conversation.
Huge. I'm glad you brought it up. It is super hot in the entire standards industry right now, from ISO to the DMSC for QIF. Even the Siemens NX just announced they are putting UUIDs in native CAD data to facilitate this traceability loop. I expect somebody's going to come up with a better way for traceability, but right now what people have or have figured out how to do on the digital data is to stamp these unique, universally unique identifiers. That's what UUID is. In QIF land, we had called those Cupids, but it doesn't matter. It's a digital address. It's your phone number. It's your social security number, whatever. For that,
it's an identifier.
It's an identifier for very specific data elements. This is what the hot topic is. Okay, I have a part. Here's my part, right? This part number is 103. An identifier. This bore diameter is, I forget what it is. Maybe it's 1.5 inches. Maybe it's 1 1/4, something like that, right? That 1 1/4 dimension, feature of size, has another identifier, call it ABC. So now you're 103 ABC. And then I say the tolerance is 10 thousandths. Positional tolerance to the base. Okay, that's another one, XYZ. So now you've got a traceability path with an address list. What did I say? 103? 103 ABC, XYZ. That got you down to the tolerance. That traceability is your requirement. Now measure that. Report back to me on inspection. Tell me, Mr. CMM machine, what is the what is the result? And it's going to be an aggregate result because they're going to measure a whole bunch of points with that CMM, and they're going to report back. Meets the requirement, does not meet the requirement. That's what we're talking about. And
and all of that, to your point, the traceability, you have to have identifiers for all these data elements if you want it to be traceable, to go back and have it be transparent, trustworthy. Right?
Because I think so what you just described, that is nirvana, right? Because what Jennifer just described does not require any sort of additional file.
So or maybe it does. It's across files.
No,
but the point, her point is the schema of doing it doesn't need a file. That's what you're saying, right?
It's just access to the data that you need.
Right.
Just that data, not the file, not the measurements, it's access to those identifiers and that
data.
I
can say when you go to implement it, Jen, that where people get hung up on it, and we get hung up on it too, because it's challenging. Eventually, you do translate to some kind of file. And so,
you do now.
And so is there a data lake of information that is accessible with these UUIDs, and you're just plucking it out of the data lake? Yeah, I think that's a great concept. I think practically I haven't seen it happen yet. So there's some...
I'm going further than that. I'm going further than the inspection. The CMM reaches back. There's an integration. And it's not, and it's just reaching into the file and it's grabbing the data. It's grabbing the original data.
Yes.
It's not, there's no intermediate file. There's no data lake, because that makes me cringe. Data lakes, you drown in those things.
That's true.
But I mean, it's just accessing only the data you need, the right data at the right time.
And for that, we have to have
purpose.
Structure, schema, Jonathan, you said. And that typically falls in the category of the standards organizations to build that structure so that there is a way to access and ping that data in a universal way. The STEP standard is that was the initial set of that data. The QIF standard was tackling data exchange from a digital metrology perspective, which was not integrated until it was adopted into ISO, into the STEP standard. So because STEP didn't have digital metrology information in it. So that harmonization, those conversations are critically important. All boils back to people, and we're all doing the same work.
Right. Yeah. So I want to dig back into this data construct thing, because to me it's really important. I have a working theory. People may think I'm nuts, and I'm going on record here, so they really may think I'm nuts. But is that this
all the
this new
people
world? Everybody's going nuts. It's the new thing. This new world of model-based enterprise, and this kind of description that we just had of the data elements being connected to each other with their own identifiers, I want to tie this to configuration management.
Yeah, absolutely.
The big aha moment for CM2 and configuration management, when we changed the way that behaved, 50s, 60s timeframe, whatever, the idea was, identifiers. We were having problems because people were identifying or re-identifying parts in assemblies. And that's where they had challenges. When they figured out how to identify these things and connect them to each other, and at that stage it was parts and assemblies, right? That's when we started to develop all these good rules about configuration management, right? And configuration management in the context I'm talking about here, just so nobody gets confused, not variant configurations, not SolidWorks configurations, but the configuration of your product definition information, right? People said, if I'm using this assembly at this rev level, I'm using this part at that rev level, and those were your identifiers, so you knew how to put the right information together to clearly define your product. What I think we're talking about here is a next generation of CM, right? When we start talking about all of this model-based data, we are going to have to change the rules of CM.
And I'm glad you brought it up, because although my inspection example is very cool and it makes great videos and we get really excited about all this traceability, it is extremely difficult to shift the organization away from their drawings that they're addicted to in that process. So it's hard. Doesn't mean you shouldn't work on it. It just means it's hard. And what tends to happen is people want to focus on that, and they don't want to go grab the low-hanging fruit for model-based activities that could get them more funding, because apparently money makes the world go around, unfortunately. I thought it was because we're cool and smart, but no, apparently it's money. So
this is back to you being a rock star.
It's going to fund MBD. I think what is important is the only thing constant is change. We are constantly making changes to the data. If we focus on what are the ways we can make changes to the data faster, what is the model-based definition that enables that? What is the model-based definition that gets me out of my mindset of, I can't possibly make a change. It's too hard. It takes too long. That's the wrong mindset. You actually want to be making changes way faster. That should be the goal. I don't care about any of that. I mean, I love digital metrology, don't get me wrong, but I don't actually care about that. If I can make changes fast and pop them out to you at any moment, if I can Google Doc with you, and we can bang out the world's greatest script on probably chocolate snakes that eat something, was probably what my 10-year-old was writing about at the time, in a whole new world building event. But if we can make those changes happen faster, then we're not so scared of the changes. Then we are focused more on, oh, it's digital. It's cool. I'll just go in. Let me modify that. I'll kick that back out to you. We're good to go. And it happens. So, yeah.
To me, you just gave us, and I'll say us, Razorleaf, Action Engineering, the folks, the practitioners in this industry, you just gave us the goal statement, right? Which is we need to create digital thread systems for people that operate like Google Docs, the capability it gave people 15 years ago or whatever, right? The trust in the underlying system to keep track of everything, keep control of everything in a way that's managed and accurate, and I won't lose things, I won't corrupt things. It's going to keep it all straight for me so I can iterate quickly and collaborate like nobody's business.
Back to Generation Z, that's what they're used to doing. It's what they want to do. They love working in a team because they were trained to work in teams. I love working in a team. I'm just old in Generation X, so I'm supposed to be like isolated, but I'm really more like that generation. So I mean, like that to me is my that's how I enjoy working with people. Is let's bang out some ideas really, really fast. Oh yeah, I don't like you told me my idea sucked. I mean, politely, but. But then you iterated and evolved it to something way better. That's amazing. That's it. That's your nirvana. That's how you innovate.
Right.
And people aren't quite getting that. They're getting bogged down in whatever.
Absolutely. No, you just tied it back to the business value, right? One of the really things it's hard to put a metric around, but people again recognize the value. If you iterate more quickly, you are more likely to innovate better. Right. Okay. If we all assume that's true, then that's what we're after here, is we want a digital thread that is something that we can trust. It sort of happens in the background, and it's going to let us iterate and collaborate more quickly, more easily. That's going to get us the business value. Now, to your point earlier, how do you incrementally get business value on the way there? Because it's not like you turn it on. It's you do it a piece at a time.
It's super difficult. And I mean, we have been involved in so many journeys to get to implement model-based definition that are like, hey, turn on this tool and we'll be good to go. And by the way, they didn't bother to train anybody how to use it. So that was a total shit show.
So
it happens.
This has been a fascinating conversation to listen to and be a part of. I want to make sure that I'm paying attention, it's my job, to our listeners, a time frame here. But I think there's, we had mentioned in the beginning, possibly doing a part 2. I think there's so much here that I would love to have you back, Jennifer, for a part 2, to explore a little bit more. We could go either way. We could talk a little bit more about the technical, how we make things happen, or we can talk a little bit about how we change. You mentioned in the beginning that it's the mind shift that's required. And I heard a lot today about trust, and trust in both the tool and in the ability to in other people. And that is a thing that's kind of hard for engineers because we were taught to trust a process that we had control over. And to move beyond engineering, to move out of your department, it means letting go. So I would really, from my perspective, I'd really love to have you back and talk about that, because I think that's fascinating.
I would love to. That'd be great. Yeah,
we had a couple of good ones.
Great.
Well,
Awesome.
this has been awesome.
You're welcome.
Jennifer,
thanks for the fun conversation. And I think I threw some good analogies out there that I'll have to carry forward. So
I think it was a great conversation. I'm really looking forward to our listeners' feedback on this. I'll please, if there was something that you heard or didn't hear here that you liked, or that you want us to dig in a little bit deeper next time, please let us know. Reach out to us on social media. You can subscribe to the podcast on all the different platforms. You can find it on our website. Probably this one will be on Jennifer's website as well, so you can access it that or through social media. And, be part of the conversation. And I want to thank Jennifer for being with us today, and Jonathan, as always, for being my co-host. And until next time.
And one that gets us off topic.
Right? Of course. But always great conversations, right? And until next time, stay sharp.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you for being here and listening to this episode of Stay Sharp with Razorleaf. If If you have any questions about model-based strategies and approaches, we'd love to chat with you about that. So please leave a comment on our post or send us an email at podcast@razorleaf.com. We appreciate all the feedback we receive from our listeners, so don't be shy. And make sure to subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast platform or on our YouTube channel. Until next time, stay sharp.